This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Maxine Bell, podcast manager for the AC, and I'm delighted to bring you this introductory series exploring mental health in coaching, aimed at both coaches and supervisors. I will be talking to coaches, supervisors and experts in this field to inspire and inform you towards better supporting your clients, as well as taking care of your own mental health and well-being. You will gain invaluable insights and practical tips, both for your professional and personal development, to help you coach better, building resilience and understanding in a stressful world. We will be discussing sensitive topics, so do take care of yourself and ask for help from a friend, colleague or professional if you need it. We will be providing a list of helpful resources and contact numbers on our webpage and in the show notes on the podcast channels, but do check your local area for help. Though informative, this podcast does not replace professional help or training. Welcome to today's episode. Today, my guest Anthony Eldridge-Rogers takes us on a deep dive into our own self-care as coaches. Anthony explains what self-care is and all its different aspects, why it matters that coaches take good care of their own health, and what signs we might notice in ourselves that tell us we need to pay attention. We talk about conditioning, language and judgment, and how to increase our own self-awareness and the unnecessary pressures we might be putting on ourselves. Anthony also examines the idea that self-care is not just an individual process, but also a community one, an interdependence with others around us. It's a thought-provoking discussion we hope will help you take care of you. With me, I have Anthony Eldridge-Rogers. Anthony Eldridge-Rogers is an executive coach, trainer and organizational consultant in human well-being and coaching. He works on multidisciplinary projects using the arts, creativity and music blended with coaching psychology for community building. He has worked with leaders, senior management teams and entrepreneurs as both coach and mentor within the context of recovery, wellness and leadership. Anthony set up and runs specialist recovery and wellness coach training and consultancy, FRC Worldwide, and developed his recovery and wellness coach training program based on the meaning-centered coaching model he developed. Anthony is also CEO of Jump, Fall, Fly, an arts-based social project using coaching, circus, storytelling, physical theatre and music with young people and families to develop recovery and well-being. He consults with companies internationally as well as presenting at conferences. He also provides masterclasses for various organisations, including the Association for Coaching, EMCC, Henley Business School, Exeter University and Queen Mary University of London. He has co-authored a book on unschooling with his partner, Layla Eldridge, and he has also co-authored a book on recovery and wellness coaching tips due to be published within the next year, and is a contributor to the We Coach Coaching Tools book series. Welcome, Anthony.
Welcome. And thank you for ploughing your way through that. That was very kind of you. I should have sent something a little trimmed down.
No, it's good. It's actually just really interesting, I think, for people to sometimes hear all the different aspects of our guests and what they do. And you've got some really interesting, like the social projects in there. So I actually thought that was quite nice to add. But it's lovely to have you here, and I don't think we could have anyone better for this episode, which is focused on coaches taking care of their own mental health and well-being, which is a very important topic. I think both for our authenticity as coaches and our integrity, we have to kind of practice what we preach a little bit, so it's good. But let's start off with the basics, really. We talk about self-care and well-being. Just wondered what you understand by that term, both as a universal term or if it's specific to individuals.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of these words and phrases and language we hear around coaching and other things, they're used a lot and we don't necessarily always stop to think about what we're actually meaning by it. So I thought it was a good question. And I always like to try to be clear about what we mean, or certainly what I'm meaning when I'm talking about it and using it. So for me, self-care describes a process that takes place, that an individual undertakes to essentially look after and in some way care for a number of areas of their life, domains, you can call them domains if you like, that's a bit technical, of themselves. So it's really the term that says or signals to ourselves that we are taking responsibility for ourselves in what I would describe as a holistic sense. So holistic insofar as it includes the person's whole life. And we can come back to that a little bit later in the conversation, but I think that's a really important piece of thinking about self-care. So, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that to everyone who uses it. I do think that perhaps sometimes self-care is used to describe what I might say is a partial self-care process, not a fully rounded one. But it is the sort of signal that we are attending to something about the experience of living our lives. And the implicit in there is that, the self-care is beneficial, if that makes sense as well. I suppose that's an assumption that sits under it, doesn't it? So self-care is a process of bringing ourselves to some kind of place where we feel like we're thriving, feel like we're doing well for ourselves in our life, however we define that. So it is open to individual interpretation, and it's certainly open to individual interpretation of the behaviors that we might identify as, taking care of ourselves, so or enacting our self-care. And certainly that crops up a bit where people go, oh, you do that, and other people go, oh, I wouldn't do that, I wouldn't do that, so on. So it speaks very much to sort of differences. But I do think that there are some very clear and interconnected areas of being a human being, living a human being's life, that we could all probably agree on. And no doubt in this conversation we're going to do just that, or that most people agree on. So, and self-care in that sense describes that grouping of those areas.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. It made me reflect a little bit on myself, actually, I think, and I think this might relate to a few people, that those of us that maybe have come from more, say, trauma-based backgrounds, as it were, and I certainly had a very narrow view of self-care until recent years. There's lots of areas that if I sat down and wrote a list, I suddenly realised I wasn't attending to, and I was actually more in a surviving mode than a thriving mode. So I really like that term, thriving. I think that's a really important aspect when we're talking about self-care.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really good point to bring out, because often people see self-care as a sort of emergency parachute when things really have got really difficult. And of course, that's absolutely right. But it presupposes that somehow there might not have been enough self-care in place in advance, if you like, of that moment. And so, yeah, I do really like to think of it like the perspective of self-care can bring you back to a healthy, thriving place. But that's not the end of it. Actually, self-care can actually take you forward into a deepening and an expansion of your experience of well-being and thriving. So it's not just a problem-solving tool. It's also a potential building tool or potential maximizing tool. In the same way, actually, that I think coaching is, it always irritates me when people make an assumption that coaching is just a remedial tool. It's just, we're just solving problems. And in fact, a lot of people come to coaching because they've got a problem they want to solve and they think coaching is the solution. But I always frame that with clients that once the particular problem that we might be coaching around has been, solved or moved on from, then we can actually get down to the real business of, how do you want to thrive? How do you really want to build your life, take it forward, sort of create a really deep experience of your life for yourself, improve your relationships, improve your, what you're trying to do in the world, the work you're doing. So I see coaches as very much, that's the coaching that I really love. And I think that self-care, when thought of in that same part of the system of human thriving, is really a powerful idea for how to actually maximize or build or reach for the potential that we all have.
I think that's really good. And I think certainly what helped me was coming across Maslow's hierarchy of needs and realizing I was down in the bottom. But I was wondering, do you think there's any difference between men and women on this, in the sense of women are often well, as sometimes as young girls, we've been trained to care for other people, and that sometimes can make us neglect. But then men can have this other issue of being providers and protectors. So I'm just wondering, I know it's quite a sweeping generalizations, but I wonder if you come across any difference when it comes to self-care.
Yeah, yes, I do. And I think the other thing that interacts with that is social conditioning and societal perceptions of what it means to have certain roles in society. So this is what men do, this is what women do, and of course we're always being sort of implicitly influenced by advertising and marketing and news and so on, and to sort of align with certain roles. And I do think that's problematic, because I think it's the same process really as raising females to behave like this and males to behave like this. It's all a sort of form of conditioning. And I think that the self-care aspect gets blended into that conditioning, if that makes sense, So, it's also not helped by the fact that there are, I'm going to sort of stick my neck out here and sort of, I hope I'm right on this, but generally speaking, I know more women who do yoga than men, for instance. Is that actually because there's some innate reason why men don't like doing yoga as much as women? Or is that some kind of natural, genetic disposition which women are born with? You know what I mean? So it's kind of interesting. Trying to untangle that's quite problematic. But I do think that's, in some ways, men struggle more to, in certain aspects, look after themselves. We maybe can get onto that later, actually, because I think we thought we'd like to talk a little bit about, societal impact on this. But I wonder whether it would be a good idea if I just go through how I think about my self-care a bit, as a way to sort of set out the different areas that I'm certainly talking about when I talk about it.
Yeah.
Would that be a good place to go?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, it's always difficult packaging these things up, but let's try it. Physical self-care. So really, when you think about what it means to look after yourself, or I think about things like what I'm eating, how I'm sleeping, how I'm moving, so exercise, how I'm resting, what my interactions are physically around things like intimacy, mindfulness, managing physical stress, managing physical boundaries. So like the physical domain. And, the difficulty with sort of putting these into buckets is that there's actually things which belong in several buckets, so because it's all joined up. But broadly speaking, the physical side is important. And why is it important? It's important because your brain is in your head, and your brain is reliant on the body for everything that it needs: blood, oxygen, all that stuff. So, and of course, the brain is the command center of our system, although it's obviously our whole system. So it's a holistic, joined up system, but we do have a brain and we do need it, and it needs to work well. And of course, it's affected by all these inputs that we put into the body, because eventually all of that makes its way up and through into our mind. So that's kind of, how I think about being fit. I think about how do I have a fit brain? How do I have a healthy brain? And would I personally think that's important to have a healthy brain? And I think from a sort of looking at it through a physical lens, if you know what I mean, all of those inputs are important. Then, of course, there's emotional self-care. There's a sort of emotional area, which is really about the way that I'm managing how I feel, how I'm using emotional intelligence to try to navigate my way through how I'm experiencing my feelings and managing my interactions, managing things like overwhelm, which is actually such a big topic at the moment in my life and in a lot of my clients. I mean, it's incredible how overwhelm's become such a thing. So that's really, emotionally, because there's such an emotional component to that. Managing under emotional self-care is looking after things like, information consumption, how much news do I watch, if any? What am I actually digesting that is impacting on my emotions? And of course, I mean, with what's going on in the world at the moment, that's kind of a really big thing to manage. So there's the emotional self-care. Then after that, I've got the psychological self-care, how do I look after myself psychologically? I actually prefer, I don't know why I prefer it. I prefer the term, when I'm thinking about myself, psychological as opposed to mental. But that could just be my quirk, because I'm not sure that it's not that I'm not comfortable with the mental, but it's just, I try to think about it across a really big psychological domain, if that makes sense. So mental would fit under that. But so looking after myself psychologically is different kinds of things. It's about boundaries. It's about creativity. It's about flow, finding flow. It's about authenticity. It's about self-direction. It's about learning. All of those things are in that sort of psychological self-care bucket. Next one is environmental and social self-care, and that's in two categories. So one is at the home where I live, my nest, if you like, and that safe place. So it's about caring for the nest, caring for the home, managing and finding the right sense of order versus chaos, and freedom versus obligation, those kinds of things which happen in homes. It's about managing who's in it with you, what those interactions and activities and relationships are, and being quite careful about what I let into that space. That's sort of something, important about boundaries there. And then, of course, the other domain of environment and self-care, or the other aspect, is the outside world. So out there in a workplace, how do I manage that environment? How do I look after those relationships, those social interactions, community, that kind of thing? And the last one really is spiritual self-care. This is yet another one which is very personal. What do I mean by spiritual? I'm not entirely sure that spiritual is a separate thing, because I feel that looking after yourself spiritually is interwoven, if you like, but with all the other things. But anyway, for the moment, we'll call it a separate thing. And what's in it is things for me like awareness of my consciousness, what it means to be a conscious person. It's about presence and being present. It's about relationship to the wider mystery of the world and the mystery of life, and connection to nature. And it's again about creativity and flow and things like that. So it's a kind of mixed up stew of quite a few things. Do I have a self? The debate that's going, I don't know, it seems to be everywhere at the moment. Does the self actually exist? How much control do we have over ourselves? All these kinds of things, I think, fall into this kind of awareness and spiritual bucket. So yeah, that's kind of how I sort of try to think about it if trying to set it out. In reality, all of that stuff is all interwoven, because all of it interacts with and affects everything else. So it's like a tapestry. It's like a woven thing, as opposed to a set of non-interrelated things.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, that's probably a much more comprehensive list than a lot of people will consider. And as you say, they are all interwoven. And for me, the spiritual includes my ethics and morals as well, and things like that. So, as you say, we've all got an individual kind of little twist to all of those things. But and even though our focus has been on mental well-being, as you've pointed out, you can't separate the physical, because what we put into our body affects what happens to our brain, which then affects psychologically. There's lots of different impacts, so you can't really separate them clearly, can you? Which is why we're talking. I was thinking about language as well, because you mentioned you put mental under psychological. And I think there's some historical connotations with the word mental even, when we think about mental hospitals and we think about mental illness, there's kind of this sense of craziness about it, or there's something unpredictable and unsafe about using that term. So I just wondered if you wanted to dig into that a little bit more about the language we use and what we might understand, or what we might have associations with the term mental, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely spot on there, because one of the areas that I've worked a lot in is where there's a lot of stigma, and discrimination. And that's, of course, in the addiction and substance misuse arena, where, of course, there's still unbelievably, a lot of collapsed thinking about addiction and dependency, and process addictions, like gambling and, porn addictions and those kinds of things. And of course, I don't know if it's still done. So people say it these days, but, you can actually it's a bit of an insult, isn't it? Say, so you're mental, So it's like, because it does have those, if you don't have good mental health, then are you, should you be in a psychiatric hospital kind of thing? And what does that mean? So that's why, in a way, because I do sense that the word can have that baggage, which is tricky, I sort of went for, and like to use the word psychological, so that we don't have to wrestle the implicit primed content of the word, mental. And in working with and coaching quite a lot of people around what they would call their psychological challenges and difficulties, I have found that how you use language really, really matters, actually, because it can be so, it can kick off quite deep feelings in people because of other experience in their life prior to when they're in the situation you're in. And so I think everyone really should try to find the language that works for them. I mean, that's what I normally do with my coaching clients. They get to choose how they describe themselves, rather than me saying, I normally, if I see a new client, I won't say to them, would you like to talk about your mental health? I won't even use that question unless they have previously said, I'd like to talk about my mental health. Then I say, okay, well, they're using that language. So I always want to try to work with the language they're comfortable using. And quite often a word can be really important to people, but sometimes, weirdly, people don't really care what word is being used. They're more interested in being understood at what the experience of whatever the thing is that is happening to them. I mean, I think another word that is possibly becoming tricky in some senses, in some contexts, is trauma. The word trauma, because it's being bandied about, in all sorts of contexts, like, oh, I missed my bus, I'm traumatized, which is clearly not what the word actually means, right? Because, down the other end of the continuum, right, there's trauma of, indescribably horrible and difficult challenges, so sometimes it's even, I don't know if you've noticed, but that word is literally trotted out all the time to sort of wrap its arms around sort of everything that's...
It's a social media side effect again, isn't it? This language use is bandied around on social media with trauma and other words, and even self-care, as we've said as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I think part of self-care, I think, is getting to choose how you want to describe and what language you want to use to describe the process of your journey through life, and if you want to call it, I don't know, looking after the parrot, if you want to have some humor in there, you can, so rather than sort of going up to people and saying, oh, how's your self-care? I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's so easy to just fall into these words. And
I think that's where we're talking about societal views, what one person might mean by mental wellness or physical wellness might be different for different people. And I think as coaches, when we're talking about our own health and our own mental health well-being, what does that mean to us? But you've pointed out a very important thing, that it's about kind of, in a way, how you function every day, how you're doing, how you're
Mm.
you're doing different tasks to take care of all these different parts of who you
Mm.
are as a human. And what is one for one thing is going to be different for somebody else, potentially. Though,
Yeah.
of course, with wellness, there is going to be a boundary there somewhere, isn't there, before when you skip into that, maybe. But I think we had a question as well after this. I guess it relates to what you're saying. I don't know if we've already covered it, actually, Anthony, but who gets to decide what self-care is, and what outcomes of the process of self-care might be universally recognised by people generally? Have we answered that already?
Well, yeah, I think we probably have, but I mean, we could reiterate, which is to say, it's like you get to choose what self-care is for you ultimately. I mean, it's not for me or anyone else to impose, say, no, this is what it should be for you. I mean, I think we've got to take that position, particularly as coaches, because coaching is not about imposing a set of views on someone we're working with. It's our views or our perspectives. It's about working with what they are doing with their own views and perspectives, and which of course can change as a result of the interaction. But we can't.
Maybe I should actually flip that question. As a coach, how do we know when we might need self-care, when we need to take care of our own mental or physical or emotional well-being as coaches?
Well, that's a really great question. So I suppose, I think as we said just now before we came on, one of the problems is that it is possible for us to only gain the insight that we might need to work on our selves in the self-care context after the event, if you like, after we've gone through a few orange and red lights, if that makes sense. So I've noticed that myself, really, which normally sort of it manifests with me suddenly feeling perhaps anxiety or stress or some other emotion in a way that is kind of like a flashing red light, like, oh, I'm really anxious right now. Now, normally if I sit down and go process, I go, actually, I've been feeling like this for a while. This didn't just turn up today. It's just got to a 10 today, but it's actually been, there's a sort of prior building up of something. And that speaks really to this sort of the need for being, checking in with yourself a lot, and also having people around you who you can check in with that you trust. So that could be, if you're a coach, that could be your coach supervisor, or it could be your coach if you have one, or it could be a partner. It could be somebody you trust, a good friend, colleague, so on. But it's also, for me, part of self-care is trying to answer this question. Do I have what mirrors around me that I can trust so that I can see myself more clearly? And so that could be like, am I off beam here, Maxine? It's like, do you know what I mean? Like, you go, yeah, you are. Oh, am I? Okay, good. Right. Well, let's talk about that. So that's really important. It is important that coaches have to work harder at this, I think, because you can't really imagine showing up to a coaching session with someone if you really are hanging on by your fingernails, or you're in an extreme emotional storm, or you are finding it hard to concentrate because you're very distracted by how you feel, or by overwhelm, for instance. And whilst I do know that sometimes the antidote to being absorbed in yourself in that way can actually be listening to somebody else, right? So that's true as well, just in case anyone's thinking that, saying, no, but when I go coaching, I find it's really useful because I forget my problems, right? So there is that aspect as well. So I'm not saying that isn't there, but your session with your client doesn't actually exist to help you manage your anxiety or manage your depression or manage your, right? So it's a very dodgy line. So we do need to be what I call fit for purpose, and the question of, okay, so what does that mean? Again, we have to come back and say, for me, this is what fit for purpose means, that I'm not unduly agitated. I'm not unduly distracted. I'm not unduly unable to concentrate. I'm not in the come down from an emotional storm. I don't have a emotional hangover. That I'm in some kind of clear water, which I recognize as a good place from which to engage with people. So that's quite a bit of work, really, for coaches, and it can be very difficult because life doesn't cooperate often, because it just throws things at us, which we have to catch. But I think we probably all know the difference in our bodies, and I'm very keen on. I said holistic before. I'm very keen that we become. It's really useful, and you can use mindfulness or meditation. There's other practices to become really aware of your body, because most of what's happening to you is sensible. You can sense it in your body, and we need to check in with ourselves often to find that place of equilibrium.
Just going to add from my experience, because I've had burnout a couple of times in my career. The things that I guess I noticed about myself, and I think many people might relate to this, is one, I was giving too much at times. So I was working with traumatized young people at some point and realizing I was overly involved. I was taking them home with me. I was sort of lying awake at night worrying about them, when actually when I eventually woke up, it was me that needed the oxygen mask. And other times, like you said, there's opposite times when you're giving too little, when you're not present, when you're distracted. That's the other way. And the other thing I think for me is some of the habits that we do to cover up how we're really feeling, which may be one too many glasses of wine, or a glass of wine every night we feel we must have, or a coffee or chocolate, whatever our thing is that we turn to, or we spend the weekend watching some Netflix series, floating off into La La Land with that, rather than actually dealing with how we really feel. So I think your point about that mindfulness, about being present with our body, and I do that now through going out in nature. That's my meditation. And then you become aware of an ache and a pain. You become aware of an emotion that's coming up, or a thought. You're right, to allow those moments of quietness almost, and stillness in ourselves that we can give ourselves regularly, is a really good place to start to really notice. And you can do that while you're washing up. I find, if you're really, well, actually, yeah, my chest is a bit tight today. What's that about? And ask yourself those questions. So from what we're both saying, it's really that self-awareness and continuing to give yourself that kind of attention, particularly in careers where we're giving out a lot. We're holding space for other people. Yeah, maintain that oxygen mask. So yeah, you're right. It's about paying attention to what's going on in us, and picking up on the signs. So what's the relationship between self-care and the community around us, Anthony?
Well, that's a really important question. And I think the first thing I'd like to say is that because it's called self-care, there tends to be this tendency to think of it as all being about us. But of course, we only thrive and are able to navigate through our lives if, from the point of view of being in relationship to the world, relationship to other people, to those we care for, to those around us, and all those people that we interact with in various different ways. And so pulling that sort of truth of most people's lives, I mean, I do accept that some people sort of live up in a mountain on their own and never see anyone and so on. But I mean, most of us are living in communities of some kind and interacting in communities in some kind of way. So when we see that to be the way that human beings generally live, and of course we've evolved to be like that, we're social animals, we're community creatures, then we can say, well, how do we think about this idea of self-care inside that truth, if you like? And I think that is quite a game changer, because I think what tends to happen is some people can feel a real weight of responsibility. Self-care is all your responsibility. It's something that you do and you've got to do, and you've sort of got to get it right. And, are you eating enough, running enough, sleeping enough? There's all these metrics that we're surrounded by, and that can become its own kind of stress, which actually sort of flows against or pushes against the whole notion of self-care in a way. But when we think about it in terms of the outside world, and we ask, how does the world in which we live reflect back to us not only our self-care, but the self-care of other people? So what does it mean to be in partnership, to look after ourselves and then each other. So if you think about a self-care kind of activity, we might go, a good example might be, let's say we go to a mindfulness or meditation event, and we go and we might go from that place of, I really need to have that experience that meditation is something that I enjoy, or that it helps me or calms my mind and so on. But of course, it takes place in a group, doesn't it? You get there and there's a group of other people. You might know them. Some may be your friends, or certainly your co-meditators, for instance. And it might be the teacher or whoever's leading the meditation or mindfulness class. And so there's this interaction that's built into, and what's really happening there is that we are feeding each other's care. We are meditating together. And so at that point, it ceases to be just about me and becomes about all of us in that space. And I like to think of it like this, if we think about a statement that, self-care is essentially a collaboration, is mostly a collaboration with our lives outside of ourselves and through our relationships and the communities in which we sort of move. And that it's also mutually reinforcing. So what happens is that the more we sort of engage in this notion of self-care and thriving, it can become easier to thrive and take care of ourselves in the sense that it has a sort of momentum. And I think that's really quite important, because I think often at the beginning of this, some people's journey about consciously thinking about this, that they can feel that they are, that it's quite hard and it's quite lonely. And I think loneliness is another thing. So self-care also is about this other communal activity. And it's also, I think that another statement we could make about it is that self-care can be, and usually is, a co-creation. It is something that comes out of something that we do with another person or other group of people. And I think that's an incredibly important thing to think about when an individual thinks about, what does it mean to look after myself? So we could say, what does it mean to look after ourselves and others so that we can look after each other? And that goes a long way to solve quite a lot of other things, right? So, loneliness, belonging, feelings of being useful, participation, all of course of which, bolster that connection and of course produce different chemical combinations in us to do with things like serotonin and oxytocin, that kind of thing. And that starts, if you like, this sort of momentum of feeling like we're doing better.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never thought about that community aspect of self-care in that way, and that when you do go to group things, that you're all supporting each other's self-care. It's interesting. I think this might be an issue that a lot of people have, but the practice of self-care can be hard personally to maintain every day, especially when you get into lots of details about self-care, things that initially you can think of it as one element of self-care, like improving your diet or getting some exercise, but my experience is there's a lot more to it. So have you got any tips for sort of getting that practice into making self-care a daily thing, actually?
Well, I would say that I would go along with, I don't know if you've heard of, or our listeners have heard of, tiny habits, but there's a lot of research about behavior change that is about our relationship to the things that we habitually do, and how the best way to change the things that we're doing around us is to actually daisy chain habits together. So what you do is you take a habit that you always do. So in my case, that would be get up, have a cup of coffee, for instance, in the morning, let's say, and something that I sort of do without fail every day. And if I wanted to introduce a habit at that moment or something new into my day in the morning, the best thing to do would be to sort of link it to having coffee. So whilst I'm having my coffee, I will, and then you say, I don't know, read my sayings book or look up a positive quote or whatever it is, or call my mother or send a nice message to my partner, or, whatever it is, put things together with existing habits. I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that self-care is, and behavior change is all about all the things we've got to give up, and then we've got to replace everything newly made. But actually, that's not usually very successful. And I've noticed in coaching practice, with my clients, is that incremental change is the name of the game. Not overwhelming yourself. There is nothing worse than just drawing up this massive list of things you've got to change and, writing it down. I've got to change my diet. I've got to change, you know what I mean? By the time you get to the end, it just seems an impossible hill to climb. And so the trick is start really, really small. Start with one thing and just make that your go-to goal in the period of time. And also, secondly, start with the easy stuff. It's really important to not try to, take on that almost impossible, lose 10 pounds by Friday kind of mission, which ultimately is doomed to failure. Because what you need to do is you not retrain your mind. You've got to retrain the brain. And it basically, the goal of retraining your brain is to feel good in the sense that you've got, because we need that chemical reinforcement that when we achieve something. And so setting ourselves up to achieve things is really important. So those are kind of my main tips about, on a sort of practical level, how to get into it. The other really, really great thing to do is to not do it alone. So that goes back to what we've just been talking about, which is enrolling other people to help you, asking for explicit help with something. If you, for instance, want to go to gym, get a gym partner, or if you're going to go out and do something else physical, increasing your physical thing, do it with people. Find a friend to go, rock climbing with in the rock climbing gym, for instance, which is really good fun. So it's about being very, practical and using other things in your life, like friendships and so on, to try to support the change.
That makes sense, actually, because I feel for myself there's still a lot of areas I need to improve in self-care. But actually, I started a habit maybe 5 years ago of drinking 2 litres of water in the morning before I eat. I eat later. And that's just an automatic thing now that I do that every day, that habit has settled in. And things like changing food, as soon as I stopped trying to diet, I lost weight. As soon as I just thought, this piece of food, this bit of pomegranate, this whatever, is really good for my body and it makes my body sing. As soon as I start eating like that and noticing how my body did respond to those things, it became just an act of love rather than oh God, I'm giving up this and I'm giving up that. It's more that actually you start to feel the benefits of the habit, don't you? Once you've done it for a while, not tackle every area at the same time, as you say. So I think that's important. And I agree with you that being an environment where you're in a group or where you're getting help, in fact, asking for help can be your step in your self-care, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah.
For some of us that have been quite self-reliant, I think that's quite a big step. So so that's really wonderful.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that you'd like to add on that sort of topic of this idea of self-care and the community?
Well, I think, yes, a very important point, which is that it's really good to remember is that self-care will stop being something that you think about eventually. It'll just become the way you live. And because that's really how we work, with enough repetition and enough reinforcement, we become implicitly self-caring. Instead of waking up in the morning and thinking, oh, I must do something, so self-care for myself, we just do it. We have the water, then we have the cup of tea, and then whatever it is. And we will stop eventually thinking, I'm doing self-care, it'll just become our life. And I think that's really important to remember, because at the beginning you're thinking this is a bit like, pieces of paper and, sort of whatever the plan is. But actually that all falls away eventually. And the body is an incredible thing and our minds are incredible and we are endlessly adaptive. So, you can think of the opposite of self-care, which you might say, well, why do I behave in ways which are counter to my overall self-interest, and interest in myself? Why do I do that? Well, that's learned behavior. And of course, all behaviors in that sense are learned, and you can just learn a new set. But there'll be that time when you've got old framework of behaviors and new ones, and it's not too hard to understand that the ones you're very familiar with will be default and the new ones won't be. And so it's going to take some time, but eventually the new ones will become your absolute default. And you won't one day you'll realize and you go, oh, look at that. I didn't even think about that. I'm just living much better and I'm feeling much better. And I think that's important because we need to know, we need to believe that it's possible, and it is, so, and I've seen it hundreds of times,
I can vouch for that as well. Yeah, I can vouch for that. I think, I'm a non-drinking, vegan, drinking lots of water girl, and I had an eating disorder for many years, just to be frank in that. So I had a lot of issues around food, but now I'm in this place of having looked at why I was doing that to myself, of course, but then now I'm in this strong place of this is so automatic. I don't want to reach for that thing anymore because it feels self-betraying almost. So it absolutely is possible to change even from something like me, from quite an extreme state into being, and enjoying it and feeling the benefits in my body and my mind. And it's a wonderful thing to do. And I do think for some of us, it is important, as you said, to particularly ask that question, why am I self-sabotaging? Why do I not value myself enough? Why do I want to give that thing to myself? And maybe there's an emotion you're trying to stuff down with some of those habits as well to avoid. So but we've talked about this, how it's a holistic approach, isn't it? So it's a physical and an emotional and psychological and spiritual journey, self-care, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, we've also talked about, that not all the forces outside there in society, are on our team in terms of self-care. I mean, so we're constantly having to decide how we're going to navigate the messaging that's coming at us, telling us to take a different course, to eat the foods that aren't good for us or drink the drinks that aren't good for us, and so on. So, I mean, it's not easy out there in society in lots of ways. And that's also not to be underestimated. So that's why also, again, community is a great way to inoculate yourself against actually that kind of thing. And also restricting your media diet. So there's lots of things. We could have a long conversation about the relationship between advertising and well-being. But I was going to say, it's so true what you said about I don't drink, and I haven't drunk for alcohol. I mean, I drink obviously, but for I don't know, so long, like 4 decades. And people still say to me, God, how do you do that? How do you not drink alcohol? And it's like, well, because it never occurs to me to drink alcohol. I mean, it's just not even, I mean, it's just not even a question. It's just, I don't go around, hitting old ladies over the head either. I mean, it never occurs to me to do that, So,
and it's strange. It's even strange when I see people drink to me now, because I'd see how much better I am without it. And I'm not judging them. I'm just like, that's weird. And same actually for eating meat. I just find that weird now, because to me it's automatic not to eat meat. So that's my own personal journey. I'm not saying you have to do that. What we're saying is just that you can come out the other side of feeling like it's an effort. And if it is an effort to self-care, the question is, why do I find it hard to care for myself? Particularly in careers like coaching, where we're giving to other people, we're encouraging their self-care. We're encouraging all the things that we might not be doing ourselves. So,
and I mean, hanging out in communities of people also, it's important to select a community that is supportive of the thing that you're. Yes. I mean, if you don't want to eat meat, you shouldn't hang out with people whose mission in life is to eat steak on the barbecue, and the same with drinking. I mean, when I stopped drinking, I didn't hang out in the pub with people drinking. I hang out with other people who didn't want to drink a lot or at all. So this is, another important part of self-care is thinking. I mean, you could think of it like this, what is the ideal environment? What is my ideal environment where I'm really looking after myself? What does that look like? Describe it, and then try and find it. Try and live with people who live like that, or spend time with them.
Or who are at least supportive of your changes, and are not going to constantly dig at you for it. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a really important part of the conversation, Anthony. Thank you for that, about community, about that collaboration, that co-creation, that support.
Thank you.
You've mentioned already there's some particular components in self-care related to coaches, which you've said, because you said it's quite difficult for coaches at times. But self-care also changes, doesn't it? It's not like a static thing. Different things happen to us in life, chronic events, a bereavement.
Yeah.
When those things happen as a coach, and say you're running your own business, how do you manage that? How do you take time out from that kind of circumstance?
Yeah. I mean, yes, that's a really good point that is really important, is that for me, this perspective really comes from, first of all, connecting to the fact that we are animals, that we are part of nature, that we are not living lives of fixedness, if that makes sense, that we live in an ever-changing, ever-moving, ever-flowing world, and that we are seasonal in some ways, we are rhythmical, and we are biological. And I think it never ceases to amaze me how little that is spoken of. It actually helps with two things. One is, so many people say to me, I don't know, I'm just having this really difficult week and I don't really know why, and as if there's something wrong with them, as if there's a problem that needs solving. And it often leads to conversations which satellite around the question like, so do I expect to feel the same all the time, right? Is that the goal here, that my emotions are going to come to some fixed place and sort of coalesce there, and that's it, right? And it's like, okay, well, no. And then when you say that to people, they go, no, I don't mean that. That's silly. And I go, well, yeah, I suppose it can be. You could think of it as silly, really, because, emotions and things go up and down. So if they go up and down and change, is it possible that other things affect how we feel, And so now we're back into saying, so what does affect how I feel, and what affects how I feel and what I think is, coming back to this incredibly important thing called the world around us, our environment, right? So we often, I think, engage with really difficult subjects and sort of pretend that we haven't engaged with them. And that can be the front page of what's going on, for instance, in the Middle East at the moment. And then we go, oh, yeah, another bomb's gone off. And what? Well, hang on, stop for a second. It's kind of like, am I engaging? Am I not engaging? What does that really mean? And I think that all this speaks to the fact that we need to find a way to see ourselves more as, using a metaphor, which I like to use, is we see ourselves more as boats on the ocean, where with different sized waves and different winds and night and day, and we're near the coast and then we're not. We need to see ourselves as is constantly in movement and constantly in flow and constantly in engagement with all sorts of different things, and use that as a starting point for self-awareness. So if we can accept that as a kind of ground, then we can say, well, who am I in all of this? How do I respond to these things? What is my self-awareness when this happens, when that happens, when I'm tired, when I'm hungry, when I haven't had enough sleep, when somebody's been horrible to me at work, when my client has said they don't want to work with me anymore, or my other client's having a breakdown, or, or do you know what I mean? I need more money, or I've got too much money, or I'm ill, or somebody else. Do you know what I mean? All of these things. Who am I in all of that? And who am I going to be in all of that? And that ties in really well to self-care to me, because that is living, right? I mean, to me, that is living. That is what to be a human alive means. It means to live with all that uncertainty, with all that flux, with all that's in there, all the good and the great and the wonderful and all the difficult and grief-making and regrettable. And what we're trying to do is pick a path through that. So the first tool out of the box has to be self-awareness. Has to be.
Yeah.
Because if you can't ask the question, we know this as coaches, right? I mean, we go off and we train, how to ask a question, right? But what's that saying that I say when I'm training, my training class, I say the quality of our life is determined by the quality of our questions, right? So you need to start asking the questions about yourself to understand how to sail the boat of yourself, if you know, like the metaphor. So it's a kind of beautiful but complicated thing, I think. as I'm speaking, I realize that it doesn't boil down into a reductive, top 3 things to do for your self-care, right? Do you know what I mean? Which I think we want it to, don't we? In a way, part of us goes, "Plus, somebody just
give
throw
me a
me
workbook."
somebody give me a 5-step process and job done, so I can move on." But that's the reality of caring for ourselves and being present to what it means to be alive. Really, I think.
Yeah, there's a few really good points in what you've said. The first one about the questions, because, for instance, if you do come home and you are reaching for that third glass of wine or whatever, there's a good question there. Why am I reaching for the third glass of wine? Like, is there something I don't want to feel? Is there something I'm trying to avoid, or is there something I'm trying to gain from that? Like, the good feeling you get from a bar of chocolate or whatever it is. So this is how I've improved my self-awareness, is to ask those simple questions. So, and any of us that have ever had any sort of addiction problems, and I had an eating disorder years ago, was out of that was the question of, why am I reaching for that pile of food or whatever? What's really going on? What is it I don't want to feel? And it's a really powerful point of change. So questions are, as we know as coaches, or should know, really powerful tools. So I really liked what you said that. And I was also thinking as you spoke that one of the things that I find in the coaching world sometimes is this idea that we're here to sort of change the world, we're the change makers, we're this. That's a lot of pressure, isn't it? That's a lot of pressure to put on ourselves, that we've got to do something big. And probably like yourself, I've learned that sometimes it's the small everyday things that really have a lot of impact on us. And so there's just that also sometimes, what kind of coach are you? How much pressure are you putting yourself on to do this big thing? Or if your client doesn't go in the direction you thought they could, are you taking responsibility for that? Or are you saying, well, are you able to let that go and go, well, they've made their choice, we've talked about it, and they're choosing this, or, whatever. So, there's a specific thing to do with coaching that I was thinking of. And then I think the third thing that came out for me was, when you were talking, was this compassion that we must have for this constant flux and flow of life and what's within ourselves. And if we're having a day where we're feeling a bit one way, just having a day where I'm feeling that way, and have some compassion for that, rather than trying to force ourselves out of it sometimes and be harsh.
Yeah. I think that also, there's often quite a lot of conversation about happiness, isn't there? Like, people say, I want to be happy. And I always think, this wasn't my idea at all, but I did remember reading it somewhere, about happiness. If you want happiness, you need to grow flowers. And you need to be a gardener. So what you do is you garden, you plant seeds, and you grow flowers. And if you're lucky, they give off a scent. And that is happiness. The scent is happiness, and you can't get the scent without the flower. And that's the idea. And I really was struck by that, because I think happiness is what we describe as happiness. And again, depends, everyone gets to define what that is, but is the outcome of something else. And it's not something that we can go after directly. And I think that that's true a lot of times in this sort of realm of self-care, because I'm just trying to think of an example. So goals are really good, right? And some people have goals, but the goal gets imbued with too much expectation, if that makes sense. It's like, I'm going to go and work out at the gym and get big muscles. And, in service of what? Well, then I'll be more handsome, and I'll be less shy, and I'll be able to get more, dates, and I'll be able to find a partner. Do you know what I mean? Or whatever it is. And then I'll be able to get married, and then I'll have kids, and, and do you know what I mean? It's like, whoa, hang on. You're just going to the gym to invest in being fitter. So that loading that trolley up with so much expectation can be interesting in some ways, but is to be treated with some caution, because of course then you miss a day's gym, and then now you're distraught because you've literally started to trash this incredible future that going to the gym was all about. So there's all these kinds of, sort of psychological traps which are await us unless we're really on our self-awareness game, because it's so easy for him. We seem to be really good to going onto autopilot with our behaviors. There was a lovely saying that a guy said in a talk once. He said, as soon as I find a good habit, I turn it into a rut, I furnish it and move in. So this, idea that it's all about getting the right habits. That's another thing. It's like what are the 12 habits? These 12 habits are, that's it. They're going to fix my life, And then we trot out and we try the habits. And of course they don't, because we change and life changes. And what works this week may not work next week or next year or next decade. So this willingness to be with this uncertainty is really a big part of a lot of things that we do, particularly with coaching, because our clients are also having to live in a world of complete uncertainty as well. And we need to be able to be in that world with them so that they have us in there holding that space and saying, this is uncertainty. And but we need to be able to do that for ourselves first. And that's quite an art.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing journey from what you're saying, and I think what's nice about what you're saying. You've not come to this conversation and said, right, 12 habits for you to take care of yourself as a coach. It's more about...
Well, listen, I'm willing to dish them out if anybody wants a set.
I mean, certainly before we end, if you've got any top tips, but your general sense is this self-awareness, this tuning into yourself. It's including all the different elements of your life, whether it's psychological, emotional, physical, environmental, and looking at them and going, and maybe taking it like I do now, which is in a small step of what am I going to do to care for myself today? Because I can't, when some of us who are very harsh with ourselves, we go on, we just get stuck all the time. But if you can have a softer approach, which is what I'm getting from you, Anthony, and it's even in the tone of your voice, there's this kind of, not soft as in a weaker way, but just a softness of, okay, where am I at today? What do I need to do today? Is there any particular areas maybe that I want to, focus on, or maybe I need to, take one less client for the next month while I sort this issue out, whatever it is. But and it is very individual, because all our lives have different tapestries within them, and you've got to, and like you say, and our lives are different at different times. So there's this real sense of softness. And I recently read a book called Trying Softer, and I found it quite transforming to read. But there was a real strength in it. And that's what I noticed, is that there was actually a real strength because of that, taking that pressure away of you've failed. It's like New Year's resolutions, which is what you were similar talking. Like, right, okay, I'm going to lose, 3 stone by March, ready for my swimsuit look or whatever. And then when you have a bad day, then you think you've failed. It's not that simple, is it? So so I really like that more softer slight way of looking at it.
That's really, really great. And actually, I think what that puts into my mind really is something we mentioned earlier on about some of the things that we, in a sort of Western civilizational way, have adopted some quite skewed ideas about how we should be in the world. That's societal thing. And I think that working harder, it sort of has that kind of, I can even feel it in myself, and I consider myself self-aware. Part of me goes, when people say to me, you need to work harder, I sort of go, yeah, I do. You know what I mean? Hang on, why am I saying that? Why do I need to work harder? Yeah. Hang on a second, But we're quite conditioned, aren't we? We tend to put the person who spends, you can almost brag, you hear people bragging, yeah, I did 50 hours, I did 60 hours work a week, the office or something. And you sort of know that they're kind of getting a badge in their own minds for that. And they're probably going to be given some badges somewhere. And it's quite important for us to understand what we actually are believing about the value system we're living in that we haven't questioned. And that's why. So is it really true that it's all about how many hours you spend at the office? Is that really, really true? Is it really true that we all have to become leaders? Is that really true? I mean, couldn't it be enough to just be an incredibly good follower? I mean, because that's another thing, isn't it, about the world, that we all need to develop our leadership. What does that mean? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
What, to lead other people? No, self-leadership. Okay. What does that mean? Having board meetings with yourself or something? I'm not. So there's a lot of things. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not against leadership or anything. So I'm just saying, it's like lots of things are pushed on us psychologically by society and by the cultures that we live in, and they're sticky, so they stick to us, and then we start living as if they are true, and then we find ourselves tripping up over them with our own perspective of ourselves, about our self-esteem.
Well, we're building our worth on external all the time in that sense, rather than just accepting we have worth because we're here, we're born, we're alive, we're living. I think that's where our worth is, by our very existence. For me, I see a lot of that, and I saw it in myself for a long time, where I was getting a pretend sense of worth from my career. And actually, when I removed that, which I did deliberately for a time, I suddenly realized there was all the stuff where I didn't feel worthy, just sitting there, still existing. And so actually, it's really important to have that internal sense and develop that internal sense of worth, so that you're not relying externally on I did 60 hours a week, or I got this target at that work, or I led a team of 10,000 people, or look at me, I'm a coach with 50 clients a month, or whatever it is you're giving for yourself to get the label, to maybe potentially hide from what you're really feeling, and actually the real solid ground that we exist on, once we go into some more inner work and self-reflection on that, is a lot longer lasting from and it means you don't have to rely on anyone else's opinion of yourself eventually as well. You're just, and you see people like that, don't you? Whether it's somebody like Martin Luther King or Maya Angelou is somebody who always sticks to my mind, where there's this core sense of worth in them, and they're authentic, and I think that's probably, for me anyway, an important part of my own well-being, is to seek and find that worth from inside. So slightly going off topic maybe, but it's just something to think about, I think, maybe for even for coaches, is where we're finding our identity and where we would like to, and not feeling we have to maybe fit into those labels that you've just named some of. So yeah.
I think this is also where we get into trouble with goals, isn't it? Because we seem to be very, actually, perhaps it's got a little bit better, I suppose, over the last few years, but it's all goals, goals, goals. What are your goals? So many goals are malformed, if that makes sense, because in my observation, and certainly I happened to me, I different stages of my life where I had these goals. I was going to start this business and do this, and then, but as I sort of went along, I thought, well, why am I doing this again? We're going to get money, and I realized that a lot of what I was doing was I was trying to prove something to somebody somewhere in my head or in myself, and then I thought, well, who am I trying to prove? What am I trying to prove, and to who? And it turned out to be a sort of cocktail of those things I said about social conditionings. This is what guys do, right? They build winning businesses, and I want a winning business as well, because then I'll be approved of. And so a lot of it was about trying to fill some kind of hole in my, myself that felt like it needed filling. And then I realized that all the goals I had weren't really that good, because they weren't really attached to meaning, some sort of deep sense of meaning and purpose. And I love that. I just love that thought experiment, which it's still such a cliche, but it's just so brilliant. It's just like, that, I don't know if you know the one, probably you've heard some version of it, but, do a visualization, you travel forward in time and you visit your funeral and you listen to the speeches, right? And do you really want to hear them? Yes, I really admired Anthony. He once had 50 coaching clients at one time. Incredible. Do you know what I mean? Is that what you want to hear? No. Do you know what I mean? So it's like you think, well, actually, what do I want to hear? What would I want to hear said about me?
I was a kind person, or I was a
kind, and
yes.
he was fun to be with, and he had a sense of humor, and he wasn't intimidating, or whatever it is, or So it's not, and it's really a revelation when you do that exercise, because you go, okay, that's what really matters here. It's maybe it'd be enough to just coach one person and you're working with them for a year, utterly transforms their life. Maybe that's enough,
Yes.
And what an honor that would be, and is, so, and I think all of that, I don't think we've strayed off the path. I think all of that is self-care. That's what I think. I don't think we are outside of the, off the road here. This is all self-care. What matters most to us, how we can develop a life that moves towards the things that really matter, how we can become our own person and have enough self-awareness to understand what it is that brings us the most fulfillment, joy, who are we connected to, how do we care for them, you know, all of these things. That is self-care, as much as I need to look after my body, eat well, sleep well, all those things. Those are all self-care too. But they all have to be in the same box, I think, or in the same bucket.
I think that's a really lovely sort of ending to our conversation, Anthony, actually. I think that kind of sums up what we've been talking about all this time. And I really appreciate that you haven't come with a list of to-dos with people, which is another mental pressure, I think, in this day and age with everything else that's going on. So, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Where can people reach you, Anthony, if they want to contact you?
Well, just find me on LinkedIn. It's the best way to go, because they can catch up with my links and so on there.
Yeah.
So just type me into LinkedIn. And
have you got any final pearl of wisdom you'd like to share before we go? Or do you think you've said everything you'd like to?
Probably haven't said everything I'd like to, but I always think of something afterwards. Oh, why didn't you say that? I think, what's very on my mind at the moment is the really important need for us to come together and as human beings and stop being so divisive and to love each other and care for each other. We're all living together on the same planet, and we all need each other, and we need to talk to each other. We need to embrace each other. We need to forgive each other, and we need to just be in community. That's really what I'm seeing at the moment, and that's what I'm sort of trying to do.
Yeah, thank you. That's a lovely end. Thank you for your time, Anthony, today.
Yeah, no, you're very welcome. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our page at www.associationforcoaching.com. Explore our new digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, signature programs, member benefits, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop and increase your coaching expertise.